the name of Sax's business partner in the Fox pub, John Knight. By the end of 1984, a fourth Londoner had entered the frame, Ronnie Knight, best known as the flamboyant owner of nightclubs and the husband of Carry On star Barbara Windsor. He'd fled to the Costa del Sol with his new girlfriend, Sue Haylock, just hours after his older brother John had been arrested.
Ronnie and his brother John had always had Costa del Sol connections. In fact, the house that he lived in was a property that he'd bought together, first of all, with his brother, and then with Barbara Windsor. As regards the others, well, back in 1983-84, there was still no extradition treaty between Britain and Spain. That didn't come in until 1986.
By the end of 1984, detectives were convinced that Ronnie Knight had almost certainly been involved in the Security Express job. His bank records revealed that in the days following the robbery, he'd deposited £34,000 in cash. In July 1983, £222,000 went into his bank accounts. Between October and December, he deposited a further £46,813. By the following January, when he fled to Spain, nearly £315,000 had gone into his account. Years later, Knight would claim in his book Black Knight that the money had come from selling businesses in London. Detectives were able to destroy that defence.
He put forward a story of receiving £80,000 as his share of a pornographic outfit in the West End, which he gave to his accountant in 1983. The man he named, we were in a position to prove that that man had died 2 years previously, so couldn't possibly have given him the money.
With the lack of a formal extradition agreement between Britain and Spain, Mason, Everett, Sax, Foreman and Knight were beyond the reach of British justice. But by 1985, the Spaniards were coming under increasing pressure to expel the fugitives and force them to return to Britain. Ronnie Knight and Sue Haylock got on with their lives, and in a grand clifftop setting, the couple celebrated their marriage in 1986. The wedding guests included Clifford Sax, Ronnie Everett, John Mason and Freddie Foreman. But the celebrations weren't to last. In July 1989, the Spanish acted.
Freddie Foreman was arrested leaving a certain lady's flat in Marbella and put in a police car. He thought he was going to the police station where they took him to, and then he'd probably be released. In fact, it wasn't until he was actually driven onto the tarmac at Malaga Airport that he realised what was going to happen. It took about, I think it was 7 Spanish police officers to get him on the plane.
The first we knew of it was when he landed at Heathrow Airport. We had a warrant and he was arrested.
In April 1990, Foreman was jailed for 9 years for handling proceeds of the Security Express robbery. The Old Bailey jury had found him not guilty of taking part in the robbery. Ronnie Knight was becoming more and more isolated in Spain.
I think that he became past his sell-by date in terms of a lot of the younger villains anyway that came down here. The Costa del Sol, whether you are, whether you're not a villain, is a very small world, particularly for someone who can't go home. It's, okay, if you're a retired expat, it's a gilded cage. If you're a villain who can't go home, it's just an open prison in the sun.
The crime scene in the south of Spain was changing fast. The new breed of criminal, mainly big-time drug dealers, despised the likes of Ronnie Knight, who still basked under the media spotlight and lived up to his nickname, the Celebrity.
What's happened is a lot of the villains that come here now have not come here because they're running away from anything. They've come here because they're here to do business. They have a different set of rules, a different way of doing things. They're not frightened of using violence. They have a different code of conduct, so even if you happen to have done a big blag and are a big name, you don't mean anything to them, and they react accordingly. He became, let's say to a certain extent, a spent force in the eyes of a lot of the people that are here. So come 1994, when someone in his position has not got the respect they used to command, then really it's time to move on.
On the 2nd of May last year, Ronnie Knight said goodbye to his wife and to Spain and boarded a plane to Luton Airport, laid on by Sky Television.
we received a phone call about just after 2 in the afternoon to say that he'd be landing at Luton Airport about 3:30. So we had to get together, tea, get changed and meet and get up to the airport to meet him.
Sunshine.
It was a bit of a rush.
It's been a long time, hasn't it?
In the past, most people read, when they read about Ronnie Knight, have always been told how well he likes to be presented. Silk shirt, silk tie, smart suits and shoes, etc. And bearing in mind that he'd actually come over here to give himself up, so he would be here quite some time, he was carrying a holdall with 4 pairs of shoes in it and a razor, and that was it.
Get away, Ronnie!
On the 3rd of January this year, Knight stood trial at the Old Bailey charged with robbery. For over 10 years, he professed his innocence and claimed that, like his brothers John and Jimmy, he'd been set up by the police. But the following day, he changed his mind and pleaded guilty to handling. He was jailed for 7 years. 12 years after the Security Express robbery, the police investigation continues.
We still have the warrants outstanding for those currently staying in Spain or remaining in Spain. They will always be in existence. There's sufficient evidence, we believe, to convict any one of them should they come back.
Today, Sue Haylock lives alone on the Costa del Sol. Security Express has started legal proceedings to gain ownership of the Villa Limonar. She now scrapes a living by running the kitchen at Wynn's Bar near where she lives. She declined to be interviewed. Clifford Sachs is also still living on the Costa del Sol. His wife died 2 years ago, and nowadays he spends most of his time drinking in the local bars. He has no intention of ever returning to London.
Do you have any plans to return to England?
No, not at all, no. I'm happy here. The only one they got to get me is to get my bones over there. So.
Ronnie Everett still lives in this block of luxury flats in the centre of Marbella, while Mason has moved a few miles away to this exclusive estate along the coast. They're rarely seen in public, and this is the first time either has been filmed. Every Saturday, John Mason meets up with Ronnie Everett for lunch at a nearby restaurant.
Mr. Mason? Mr. Mason? Mr. Mason, there's a warrant out for your arrest. Do you have any intention of coming back to England? Mr. Mason?
Mason was reluctant to talk about the robbery or to explain how he makes a living today. Freddie Foreman served fewer than 4 of the 9 years of his sentence before being released. He was seen in public earlier this year as a pallbearer at Ronnie Cray's funeral. He's since been spotted on the Costa del Sol. Jimmy Knight, too, has been released from prison and has returned to live in the Algarve. Alan and Linda Opiola were placed on a witness protection program by the police and given new identities. An underworld contract on their lives still exists. Ronnie Knight gets on with his jail sentence. At Parkhurst, his vegetable garden won him an award. Recently, he was transferred to a lower security prison. He's 61 years old and broke. He'll be eligible for release in 1997. 2 of the £6 million stolen in the Security Express robbery has never been recovered.
What's happened to all the money? Drawballs out there.
We should point out that Security Express radically changed security procedures in the wake of the robbery.